Welcome to Walking the Earth. Today we are in the Lumbini monastic complex on the Mahayana side, and behind me we have a temple and monastic compound that is within the Tibetan tradition, but also is run by an Austrian Tibetan organization. So it's like Europeans who practice Tibetan Buddhism or Vajrayana Buddhism have built this temple and monastic complex here in the Lumbini Garden area, and it is called the Mother Temple of the Graduated Path of Enlightenment. I believe this is associated with either Sakyapa or Gelugpa. I could be mistaken about this. I need to study much more deeply to understand the various traditions. These are very sophisticated complexes of traditions. But what's interesting to me, so you've got a few young monastics within this Tibetan tradition. And what's interesting to me is that since it's a European or cooperative project, and there are Europeans within, practicing within this Vajrayana tradition, this tantric tradition, they've incorporated a number of European designs into the structures on the campus. And so you'll notice it's referring to classical Greek designs with the columns, and then the roofs. And so I find that quite interesting, because Buddhism, a lot of people don't realize that there were very strong Greek influences on the development of Buddhism during the late period of the original 17 or 18 schools, leading up into the Gandhara era, the era when Alexander moved his armies and scientists, the scholars, into the area around the Indus River and up into Afghanistan, Bactria region, and even had his troops marry Bactrian women. This is the region that that Muslims would call Greater Khorasan, up around Balkh as the hub of it, and then and it would have extended down into the Takshila region around Islamabad, and would have included the Peshawar area, Swath Valley. And so you'll notice that there are not only the stylistic aspects, but there are the continuities within the tradition. For instance, inside the main temple, you have images of Shakyamuni Buddha, and depicting his birth. And then those statues and the paintings have influences from the Greeks. And so a Greek stylistic influence impacted Buddhism, which did not depict the Buddha as a human for the first 500 years of its existence. You will find depictions at the Sanchi Stupa from the Ashokan era that depict people going about their daily activities, wearing turbans, having dreadlocks, showing the way that people were dressed in those days. But the Buddha himself would be depicted in abstract form as a Bodhi tree, two footprints, as a Dhamma wheel, or sometimes as an empty seat. So you would see a number of different configurations symbolizing the Buddha. But from the Greek influential period onward, we start to see, the Gandhara period, where the Buddha and bodhisattvas are depicted in idealized forms very similar to Greek gods. And this is very fascinating if you're interested in iconography, if you're interested in the development of human artistic traditions or comparative religions. We've got two stupas here facing each other. The one to my right in silver has Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha, sitting in the traditional full lotus pose holding a begging bowl. But then across from him at the golden stupa, the Chorten within the Tibetan tradition, we have Maitreya, Buddha Maitreya, Buddha Maitreya, who is the Buddha to come, the future Buddha. And what's interesting is, so if you ever see Buddhist paintings or iconography and you see a Buddha sitting in a Western style chair, then this is actually the future Buddha, the Buddha to come. Maitreya. Now the word Maitri or metta relates to loving kindness. And so this suggests something about his practice. So he's sitting in a chair, which some people have suggested this has a Western connotation. And so some people might take it as an individual born in the West, but it might mean a collective of humanity or an era of humanity. It's possible to view Maitreya as, I think most Buddhists view him as an individual, but it's possible to view him as a collective as well. So anyway, this is a very interesting place and and demonstrates the connections and the continuity of Buddha Dharma from east to west. So we'll go ahead and draw this one to a close. But here we are at an Austro-Tibetan cooperative temple and monastery that shows some of the continuity and connections between ancient Greece and the ancient Greek Buddhists who were very prevalent in these areas at one time, like up in the Swath Valley and up toward Afghanistan. Very fascinating. I believe this is a lay practitioner, a Westerner. They often wear white when you go to the different monasteries. So not a monastic, but perhaps meditating within the tradition to study. This is the rain retreats time. This is the monsoons. So many monastics and lay people will go into meditation and intensive meditation during monsoon season. So one other thing that I wanted to say before closing is that there are a number of connecting points to the West that have not been fully explored yet, related to people like the cousins of Europeans or the ancestors of Europeans that were very involved in the practice of Buddhism and Buddha Dhamma. So for instance, in Sri Lanka, they have documented a number of the Greek connections within the Pali scriptures and within their histories. And one that I find very fascinating is that when they were dedicating the monastic and temple complex of Anuradhapura, I believe that's how you pronounce it. My apologies if I've mispronounced it. But this is down in Sri Lanka, and you will find some of the most ancient stupas, including a cutting of the original Bodhi tree, is at this area in Sri Lanka. It's a very sacred place for Buddhists, but especially Theravada Buddhists. But in their histories, they record that when they dedicated the complex, that 30,000 Greek Buddhists came to Sri Lanka to recite the Tipitaka, the three baskets, to recite the Pali Canon, the scriptures of Buddhism, which would be the suttas or the words of the Buddha, the teachings of the Buddha, would include the monastic code, the Vinaya, and would include the Abhidhamma or Abhidharma, which is the psychology or philosophy of mind sciences, meditative sciences. I wish I could explain it a little bit better. It's very sophisticated, and I've never dove into the materials. But they recited these materials, the three baskets, in Sri Lanka. So 30,000 Greek Buddhists traveled the length of India. I don't know whether they came by boat or whether they traveled over land over a long period of time. But there were Greek Buddhist influences all across India, all across what is now Pakistan. And you will see these connections, and also their cousins among the Aryans, among the Scythians who became Buddhist, the Kushans, the Kushana people, that ruled over much of India after the Mauryans and before the Guptas. They came out of Central Asia. They may have been of Turkic groups. They may have been of Hun groups. They may have been of cousins of the Europeans in an Indo-Irani group. I need to dive much deeper into this to better understand. If you happen to know and understand, please share in the comments. But there are many connections to the current European peoples who are practicing Buddhism or Buddha Dharma, Buddha Dhamma in very ancient times. Because when Alexander reached the Eastern Persian realm, there were many Ionians. That's where we get the word Yunani. That is from the Ionian peoples, and they were located up in Greater Khorasan in Bactria, living there because they had rebelled against one of the Persian rulers. and he had exiled them to the far end of the empire. And so they were already engaged in Vedic practices, Zoroastrian practices, as well as practices of Buddhism that were extending from the Middle Lands up into the Swath Valley and beyond into Central Asia, and then extending out into the Silk Road areas. One other interesting point, and this could, Bodhidharma, who is very connected to the Zen tradition and the Buddhist derived or influenced martial arts traditions of China that then spread further. Bodhidharma, he was said to have been a barbarian from the West who had blue eyes and a wild beard, and he's very, very influential as a transmitter of Zen and of a stretching tradition that is close to Hatha Yoga as well as martial arts. So it would be very interesting to know more about his story and his connection. Perhaps he was of Greek derivation or of Irani derivation. I'm not aware of this, but but he certainly came from at least Central Asia, and maybe he came from the Afghanistan region. And this is definitely worth looking into. This would be a great research project for somebody who's interested in this. I'm very fascinated by the connections across Eurasia, including intellectual scholarly traditions, comparative contemplative traditions. And this temple and monastery is making an attempt to show the bridge between these ancient peoples and modern peoples. So may we find our ways out of suffering and come into a more ethical, pure way of living all across the world, and take influence and inspiration from those who sought knowledge wholeheartedly across space and time in order to pass forward something better for us, their spiritual and genetic descendants. So may we come out of our miseries. May we find the best way to attain enlightenment collectively. Till next time, be peaceful and be healthy.